In 1922, a family of 6 lived on a remote farm in Germany called Hinterkaifeck. Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, their adult daughter Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph, and the family made up the Gruber family. They were quiet, kept to themselves, and their farm was miles away from the nearest neighbors. A few days before the horror unfolded, Andreas noticed strange, unsettling things around the property. Footprints in the snow led from the edge of the forest to their house, but no tracks led back. He also began hearing footsteps in the attic, but every time he checked, he found nothing. A newspaper he didn't buy appeared on his doorstep, and his house keys went missing. Andreas shared his concerns with his neighbors, but they brushed it off as paranoia. Who would be out there in the middle of nowhere, miles away from any other house? On March 31, 1922, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived at Hinterkaifeck to start her new job. That night, under the cover of darkness, the unimaginable happened. Someone, or perhaps a group, stalked the family, drawing them one by one into the barn. No one knows exactly how, but somehow each family member ended up in the barn, alone, and was bludgeoned to death with a pickaxe or some similar tool. The killer then entered the farmhouse and took the lives of little Joseph, asleep in his crib, and Maria, the maid, who had only been there for one night. Days went by. The postman noticed the Gruber's mail was piling up. Neighbors, concerned they hadn't seen the family, went to check on them. What they found shocked the whole village. Bodies of the family members were found stacked in the barn, covered in hay, their faces blooded and bruised. Inside the house, Joseph and the maid lay lifeless. Perhaps the most disturbing part of this story is what neighbors reported afterward. It seemed that the killer had stayed in the house for several days after the murders. Smoke had been seen coming from the farmhouse chimney, the animals were fed, and meals appeared to have been eaten at the family's table. The police investigated, but the trail went cold. No one was ever arrested for the crime, and the case remains unsolved to this day. The story of Hinterkaifeck Farm stands as one of the darkest and most puzzling mysteries in German history. To this day, people wonder, who was it? Why did they do it? And, perhaps most terrifying of all, were they watching the Gruber family, long before that final, deathly night? El Paso High School in Texas is often called the most haunted high school in America. Built in 1916, it's known for its eerie, century-old architecture with dark, winding hallways and grand, towering staircases. But it's not just the building's looks that are unsettling. The school has a history of tragic events and mysterious occurrences that haunt it to this day. One of the most well-known stories involves the ghostly figure of a young girl who reportedly committed suicide by jumping from one of the school's balconies in the 1920s. Ever since, students and staff have claimed to see a shadowy figure standing on the balcony or to hear footsteps in the hallways late at night. Others say that on certain evenings, they can hear crying echoing down the corridors, even when no one else is in the building. Then there's the infamous ghost photo, a yearbook picture taken in the 1980s. In the photo, a group of students is lined up and smiling for the camera, but there's something very wrong. Among the students stands a blurry figure, a girl with vacant, dark eyes and a pale face. No one remembers the girl being there, and no one can identify her. What's even stranger is that attempts to remove her from the photo have failed. The ghostly girl appears in every copy of the yearbook from that year. In addition to the ghost photo, the school is also home to a series of underground tunnels, which were supposedly sealed off decades ago. The tunnels are said to have been used by soldiers during the Mexican Revolution, but strange reports began to surface over the years. Custodians and teachers claimed they heard voices, and some even reported seeing apparitions in old-fashioned clothing wandering the tunnels. One night, a janitor working late claimed to hear laughter echoing from one of the sealed-off tunnels. At first, he assumed it was students sneaking around, but when he got closer, the laughter abruptly stopped. He shined his flashlight into the darkness, but there was no one there. As he turned to leave, he felt a hand grab his shoulder. He spun around, but no one was there. El Paso High School's paranormal encounters have become so common that they're now part of the school's lore. To this day, students report hearing footsteps in empty hallways, seeing doors slam on their own, and sometimes spotting the ghostly figure of the girl on the balcony, forever waiting, watching, and haunting the place she once called. Late one October night, a group of 4 friends decided to explore a place known as the Whispering Woods, a forest with a dark reputation. For decades, locals spoke of strange occurrences there, sightings of figures without faces, disembodied voices calling out names, and chilling whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Despite the warnings, these friends, thrill-seekers at heart, wanted to experience it for themselves. They entered the woods under the glow of a nearly full moon, their flashlights casting shaky beams of light across gnarled trees and thorny undergrowth. The deeper they went, the denser the forest became, as if the trees themselves were closing in, trying to trap them. The temperature dropped sharply, and an unsettling silence fell over them. The forest was too quiet, no rustling of animals, no chirping of crickets, just silence. Then came the whispering. At first, it was barely audible, like leaves rustling in a faint breeze. But as they ventured deeper, the voices grew louder. The whispers came from all directions, speaking in an old, indecipherable language. Every so often, the voices would pause, then whisper one of their names. Each time the name was spoken, that person felt a sudden, icy touch on their shoulder or arm, though no one was there. They tried to convince themselves it was just the power of suggestion. But as they neared the heart of the forest, one of the friends, Mark, stopped dead in his tracks, his face pale with horror. "What is it?" whispered Sarah, his girlfriend. Mark pointed ahead. His flashlight beam fell upon a figure standing a few yards away, shrouded in shadows but unmistakably human-like. Its face was hidden, but it wore an old-fashioned, torn dress, its long hair hanging like a veil. "Hello," Mark called out, though his voice shook. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it tilted its head, revealing nothing. Where its face should have been was a black void, as if it had been erased. It let out a sound, a horrible, guttural moan that sent icy tendrils of fear down their spines. In a panic, the friends turned and bolted, but the forest seemed to twist around them, leading them in circles. The trees seemed to close in, branches grabbing at them like skeletal fingers. Soon, they realized that they were no longer running in the direction they had come from. Breathless and desperate, they heard the whispers return, louder and more insistent, chanting their names in a tone that seemed to mock them. One by one, they felt invisible hands dragging them down, pulling them closer to the ground. The friends clawed at the dirt, but the force was relentless, as if the forest itself wanted to consume them. Only Sarah escaped that night. She stumbled out of the forest at dawn, covered in scratches and bruises, her clothes torn, her voice hoarse from screaming. She was found on the edge of town, delirious and muttering about faceless people and hungry trees. Her friends were never found. And to this day, locals say that if you stand at the edge of the whispering woods at night, you can still hear the distant echoes of their names being called, lost forever to the haunted forest that claimed them.